My name is Sandra Easson-Bruno. I am the director of the North Simcoe Muskoka Specialized Geriatric Services Program. Advanced care planning is a really interesting topic of conversation right now. It is something that on a regular basis we should all be doing, but right now amid COVID-19 it is especially important, in particular for seniors. We know that seniors have a risk of more serious disease as a result of COVID. And so advanced care planning allows the individual to open conversations to make sure they've got people that are identified who will make decisions if they are unable, and know that individual's values, beliefs, and wishes. Advanced care planning is a process, and it's really about identification of an alternate decision maker for you should you become incapable, or and an identification of your wishes. So in terms of the first step, the identification of an alternate decision maker, there are times when individuals may become incapable of making a healthcare decision for themselves. And I think in this particular scenario right now, we can see that happening on occasion as individuals are ending up in ICUs and on ventilators. When that comes into play, healthcare professionals will typically turn to the Healthcare Consent Act, which was put in place in 1996. The Healthcare Consent Act identifies different decision makers that an individual can use. So if you have not identified a power of attorney, typically a healthcare professional would first turn to your partner, your spouse, your common law partner, your spouse. The next step would be a parent or a child. Kind of going down the line, you hit siblings. There are some individuals in some cases where you may not choose to go by necessarily that hierarchy, and you may choose to have somebody designated, which would be a power of attorney for personal care. So for me personally, as a nurse by background, I have seen cases where families get along brilliantly. If siblings have to make decisions for their mom or dad, they're all on the same page. It works great. I've seen other cases where the siblings do not agree. They've never historically agreed, and guess what? If they don't historically agree now, they're not going to agree when you've got to make those difficult decisions sometimes. So that in those cases, it's always wise to have a power of attorney for personal care put in place. There are different people you can have as substitute decision makers. It's got to be somebody that's capable of making the decision, that you know will honor your requests, that is available. They have to be over the age of 16. So it's important to think about that piece. Once a substitute decision maker has been identified and who that point person will be, then it's really important to have a conversation around what your wishes are. What are your values? What are your beliefs? If something were to happen to you, what's important to you? What does quality of life mean to you? If you think about treatment decisions, healthcare treatment decisions, especially right now, if you had to go into an intensive care unit, is that something that you would want? Would you want to have a ventilator if that choice was put in front of you? And so these are really important decisions right now for seniors and their families to have. We know that there are cases right now, certainly we know seniors are most at risk. We also know that with many of the restrictions that are being put in place within hospitals, long-term care homes, and retirement homes, although our team is exceptional in this region, and people will consider extenuating circumstances, there may be situations where the individual may not have their families or friends around them in their last days or their last hours, in which case it's really important for the healthcare providers to have a key contact person, somebody who's making the decisions and who they are confident is making the decisions that are in the best interests of that particular individual. In general, end-of-life care is really, really difficult for healthcare providers. And so having confidence in the decisions that are being made is especially important. And it is devastating right now for healthcare providers who are trying to provide care to individuals in those last stages, knowing that those families sometimes cannot always be present. In general, these kinds of conversations can be really difficult to have. We all need to have them. It's just ironic that the timing right now is sometimes forcing our hand to have these conversations. So they're really important conversations for us to have along the way. There are some great resources out there that you can use. So on the Hospice Palliative Care Ontario website, there's Speak Up Ontario, which actually gives you a workbook where you can actually work through some of these things. Sometimes it's getting the conversation started, though, too. And I certainly know I have friends where this conversation has not happened in their families because it's not something that they talk about. And so right now we do have an opportunity, unfortunately, with the news to open those conversations. So whether it's giving an example, a personal example, something like, do you remember Uncle John? Uncle John had that stroke. And gosh, I really wonder, you know, what I would do in that situation, or maybe what you would do in that situation. Or, in the news, there's been all of this news recently around people that are, passing away or having to make some really difficult decisions. And certainly we know many are pulling through, and there's some that are not. And so if it came down to that point, what would you want us to do? Would you want to go into the hospital? Would you want to go into an intensive care unit? Would you have, if there was an option put in front of you around a ventilator, would you want to have a ventilator put on? If your heart stopped, what would you do? Would you want to be resuscitated? Would you want a team to come in? And it's really important to understand and for people to take the time to have these conversations, for their emotion. Emotion will absolutely come through in these conversations, and that's important. It's important to have silence so people have time to reflect on things, but it's also important for people to make some informed decisions as well and think about, what does quality of life mean to me? If I were in this situation, what would I actually want? So they're really difficult conversations to have. The hardest part is opening the conversation, and you've got to almost find that right opening time and moment. But they're especially important now, because if we don't have them now, what will happen is, should somebody end up in that crisis situation, then all of a sudden the families are trying to scramble and make decisions and think back on what mom or dad might have wanted to choose. And that makes it even more stressful, because they're using their best guess and knowledge, but maybe haven't necessarily had that conversation. This is a really difficult time for everybody. Certainly unprecedented. We're not in this alone. This is not just happening in our region. It is happening across the province, across the country, globally. We're hearing stories coming out from around the world of good news and sometimes tragic news. And so it's really important to consider advanced care planning. There are some great resources that are out there that can be used both in this region, from this region, and more broadly. We have some great hospices in this region, the Simcoe Muskoka Hospice Palliative Care Network. There is a bereavement line that has been put in place that is not just for individuals with COVID. It's any individuals that are facing grief or feeling grief to reach out. So I think it's really important that these conversations happen, that they are informed conversations, and that people are aware of the resources that are out there for them at this point in time.